Chris Martin here in the Martin Museum in front of a brand new display commemorating the 100th birthday of the Dreadnought guitar. So I've become quite interested in the Dreadnought the ship because the Dreadnought the guitar is named after the Dreadnought the ship. And the particular Dreadnought that it was named after was put in the water in 1906. It was commissioned by the British to show the world that the sun never sets on the British Empire. There were folks who had an interest in challenging that particular situation. The Japanese had built a very large battleship and had defeated the Russians in a dispute around areas of the Pacific, particularly the Korean Peninsula. The Italians were interested in building a bigger battleship, as were the Germans. And so the British decided that they needed to remind everyone who ruled the seas. And so in very short order, they went from a design to a ship, about a year, 2 or 3 months. Ship gets in the water in 1906, travels around the world, and everywhere it went, anyone who had any interest in naval architecture and defense was aghast. It was unbelievable. Unfortunately for the British, it was so significant in terms of its technology that it made the rest of their fleet obsolete, as it did the fleets of every other naval power around the world. And so very quickly, everyone began to incorporate some of those design features, and the British began to redesign and ultimately develop what is referred to today as the Super Dreadnought. Today, naval historians talk about pre- and post-Dreadnought ship design. What made it so significant? It was fast, it was lightweight, it was very maneuverable, it had a turbine engine instead of a reciprocating piston engine, and it had all the same size big guns, and it was referred to as the first all-big gun ship. And the reason that I'm talking about this is because the context in which our Dreadnought was named was one that we can't even begin to relate to. I must admit that when I grew up, the war I was familiar with was the Vietnam War. My mom would talk about World War II. I don't remember anyone talking about World War I. So I've done some research. And what I didn't realize was that most of the battles that were fought during World War I weren't fought at sea. They were fought on land in god-awful, dirty, muddy, bloody trenches on the border of Germany, between Germany, Belgium, Germany, France, and Germany and Russia. The war went on for 4 years. So in 1916, when we introduced the Dreadnought, the war was in the news, even in the United States. The United States was doing everything it could to stay out of the war, but it was in the headlines every day, and it was going nowhere. In fact, in 1916, there was the Battle of the Somme, which was probably the worst battle possibly ever in Europe. It went on and on and on and on, and not much came of it, except a lot of death and destruction. So we built a big guitar, and Dick's going to come up in a few minutes and tell you the origins of that big guitar, which fortunately were under much more pleasant circumstances than World War I and the Dreadnought. The Dreadnought, the ship, never saw battle, the original first Dreadnought, except in March of 1915, when it was off the coast of Scotland in the North Sea with a sister ship in the British Navy. A German U-boat surfaces, fires a torpedo, hits the sister ship, and Dreadnought, HMS Dreadnought, comes to the rescue by slicing the submarine in half, the only battleship known today to have sunk a submarine by cutting it in half. There was one significant battle, naval battle, during World War I, the Battle of Jutland. And The context of that is interesting in that the Germans decided it was time to get out of the harbor and wreak some havoc, and the British code breakers intercepted the communications that the Germans were having amongst themselves in preparation for this, what they thought would be a surprise battle against the British. And lo and behold, as the Germans sail out into the North Sea, who do they encounter but the British? And to this day, after that battle, which caused ultimately the Germans to retreat back into the harbor, the Germans claim victory because they say that they sunk more British battleships and warships than the British sunk German ships. And the British admit that, yes, that's true, but we kept you bottled up, and you never were able to actually leave the harbor again during that period of World War I. So that's the history of the Dreadnought ship as I know it. There's some artifacts in the display here that will give you a little more flavor for what the ship was like, how significant it was. The Dreadnought, the guitar, came out of a craze, a fascination in America for Hawaiian music. And that craze or fascination was kickstarted by the Pan-Pacific Exposition, which was held in 1915 in San Francisco. And there was one entire exhibit devoted to all things Hawaiian, and in particular, Hawaiian music. Now, the first and probably more significant in terms of an instrument that up until this point wasn't really popular on the mainland was the craze and interest for ukuleles. There's books been written about it. It got us into the business of making ukuleles, which we still do today. Ukulele's back, which is pretty cool. The Dreadnought that came out of that craze was a pretty slow starter. It wasn't an overnight sensation. In fact, it took many, many years for the Dreadnought to be incorporated into popular music, and it pretty quickly moved away from Hawaiian music. And today, of course, the Dreadnought's probably the most copied shape of acoustic guitar ever made, and is, I think, more popular today than it's ever been. My grandfather liked to refer to it as the bread and butter. It's the guitar that paid the mortgage. And we still make more Dreadnoughts today than anything else. And the first Dreadnoughts that we made were for the Oliver Ditson Company. I have an example here to my left. Ditson was a very good customer of ours, and we built guitars exclusively for them. Several different shapes. We have some here in the museum. One of them mimics the look of a Renaissance guitar. This particular big-bodied guitar was bigger than anything we'd ever made, and went a little bit, it was not in keeping with the way that we had designed guitars up until that point. Prior to this, as Martin guitars got bigger, and they got bigger because people needed more volume, they were playing in bigger venues, they got bigger in proportion. The upper bout, the waist, and the lower bout, and the depth all got bigger at the same time, so that we maintained a very good balance between bass, mid-range, and treble. With the Dreadnought, that went out the window, and the goal was big, loud, and ended up being a little more bass-heavy than the guitars that we had built up until that point, but it worked. Turned out to be a fantastic rhythm guitar. It's not a couch guitar. It's not that comfortable to curl up on a couch with. That's why small-bodied Martins are still popular today. But if you're going to stand up and play, particularly if you're going to play with a band, nothing beats a Dreadnought. And it's got a presence. It's got a look that, well, you know when you see someone on stage, particularly the lead guitar player holding a Dreadnought, the chances are you're going to hear some compelling music. And it really fit sort of that look that musicians often go for. You know, they know they're performing, they know that people are watching them, and anything they can do to enhance that experience, they embrace it. And the Dreadnought has really filled that void, probably better than anything else. Not the fanciest guitar on earth, although we do make fancy models, including the D45. Certainly not the gaudiest. Very durable. Works when you need it. Tough to beat. A lot of copies out there. I'm flattered. I appreciate the fact that people make copies of Dreadnoughts. So there's a documentary coming out about the Dreadnought. Articles are being written about its history, about the close connection the Dreadnought has had with musicians over the past 100 years, particularly in country music, and then, of course, bluegrass, later folk rock, blues, believe it or not. You occasionally see a Martin guitar, a Martin Dreadnought being used in the context of creating blues music. It's an amazing thing. I'm in awe of how popular the Martin Dreadnought guitar continues to be. It's a singer-songwriter's dream. It can accompany your voice. It won't overpower your voice, but you know that there's a guitar being played while you're singing. I have many, many Dreadnoughts in my personal collection. I will give you a hint. Just the other day, we had a discussion about the NAMM show that's coming up and what new models we're going to show. And Diane, my wife, who's on the board, along with some of the other board members, came to see what's going to be at the show, because they know how important this show is. And afterwards, Diane nudged me a little bit, and she said, let's buy one of those Dreadnought limited editions for Claire so that she can make the connection between her heritage and the product that still pays the mortgage. And so I have to run over to sales in a few minutes and get my name on the list, because I have a funny feeling that they're all going to sell out at the trade show. I'd like to ask Dick to come up now and give you some more specifics about the early origins of the Dreadnought. And I'm hoping that Dick, with his encyclopedic knowledge of Martin players, will tell you a lot more about who played a Dreadnought and in what context. Thanks.
So as we talk about the birth of the Dreadnought, we really have to go back to the beginning of the 1900s. The Pan-Pacific Exposition in 1915 introduced Hawaiian music to the American public, and specifically the ukulele and the slide guitar. A normal guitar can be tuned to open tuning, played with a bottle or a piece of metal, like this, and the Hawaiian music used the slide, and it kind of caught America by surprise and swept virally through American music and culture. And one of the aspects of Hawaiian guitars was steel strings. The steel strings started to have a great impact on Martin because they were louder and enabled unique slide playing to happen. So a lot of things happened concurrently. In 1915, as a result of the Pan-Pacific Exposition, a guitarist, a very popular guitarist from the Royal Hawaiian Band named Major Kealaki, ordered a special guitar, a large guitar that could be played with the slide. Martin made this instrument. It was basically one size larger than a triple-O guitar, kind of like our M size, but with a 12-fret neck, and delivered the instrument, and he played it with a slide, and it was really the predecessor of the Dreadnought. In the case over here, you can see the pattern for the Kealaki guitar, which was almost identical to the Dreadnought guitar that would follow, the only difference being that it had a tighter waist. So within a year, the Ditson Company ordered some guitars intended to be played with a slide for Hawaiian play, similar to the Kealaki guitar, with the original 12-fret Dreadnought shape. And as Chris mentioned, these guitars didn't really take off very well. They were considered kind of an anomaly. They were very, very loud, very projective, but designed to be played on your lap and braced with fan bracing instead of X bracing. wasn't until about 1929 that the X-bracing started to take hold on the Dreadnought, and Ditson went out of business in the Depression, and the only model that Martin actually picked up and reproduced under the Martin name was the full-size Dreadnought. This happened in the early 1930s and really was concurrent with Martin's introduction of the 14-fret neck. The 12-fret neck joining the body at the octave was simply kind of squashed down into a flat joining at the 14th fret and giving the musician a little bit more access to the upper registers of the neck. 1933, 1934, the Dreadnought started to take hold, was introduced in the Martin catalog as the D-18 and the D-28 in mahogany and rosewood. And it took a little bit of time, but this was concurrent with the use of microphones on stage, a good thing for Martin because the Dreadnought guitar really projected well on stage and could bring the instrument out front along with the vocalists and the violin players and the string bass. So the Grand Ole Opry and bluegrass music, as these genres evolved, and the Louisiana Hayride, radio shows like Gene Autry's radio show, Roy Rogers, the early movies, all of these things lent themselves very well to the Dreadnought guitar. Probably during this time period, Gene Autry's D45 was most prevalent in exposing the Dreadnought guitar to the American public through all of his movies. Everybody that saw Gene Autry wanted to go out and get one of these. Among those people were musicians like Hank Williams, Ernest Tubb, almost all of the members of the Grand Ole Opry during that time. And successive generations, the musicians that grew up watching the Grand Ole Opry, subsequently were inspired to also go out and get Dreadnoughts. So as we come through World War II and the early 1950s, groups like the Kingston Trio had a tremendous impact on guitar sales. Everybody went out, mostly college students, went out and bought Dreadnought guitars. Peter, Paul, and Mary, Don McLean, American Pie, Paul Simon, who is quite a small person with an enormous Dreadnought guitar, playing Sounds of Silence, and eventually the Beatles. While visiting India with George Harrison and the Maharishi, they took 2 D-28s with them and ended up writing more than 30 songs on their Martin D-28s that became the White Album, Abbey Road, and Let It Be. So the entire Woodstock generation was inspired by this. Crosby, Stills, and Nash in particular played at Woodstock with their Dreadnoughts, and Country Joe of Country Joe and the Fish played his Martin Dreadnought. Pretty much anybody that was anybody, whether it would be Neil Young or Bruce Springsteen or Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, all playing Martin Dreadnoughts. More contemporary players like Seth Avett of the Avett Brothers, Sturgill Simpson, Jason Isbell, Dierks Bentley. It's very important for us as a company to plant seeds with the new generation and see young Martin players playing Martin guitars to influence successive generations of players. We're really excited about our documentary movie, The Ballad of the Dreadnought, which is coming out this year, which really does a fantastic job of telling the full story. The invention of the Dreadnought in 1916 by Martin, and its successive evolution and influence upon American music and culture.